What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 205. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Hope everybody had a great holiday weekend. I actually took the Friday episode off of the show, as I'm sure everybody noticed. And I am going to try to put an extra episode this week of the show. So a bonus fourth episode sometime this week. Mainly just to get through all the news that I want to get through, but also, to keep up with the pace of the show and get everybody all the episodes that I promise that I'm going to put out. And I really like keeping up with that schedule. And it bothers me a little bit when I fall off, but sometimes you gotta rest, relax, spend time with family, and hopefully everybody else was able to do that this past weekend as well. And so on today's show, I'm covering COVID in Yemen. Later in the week, we'll have Russia, China, Iran, Libya, Haiti, and stories on the Pentagon, this Operation Whistling Pig that I really want to talk about. Just tons of great stuff. So be sure you're subscribed to the show somewhere. Video version on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and so you could listen on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed with Scott Horton's show, Free Man Beyond the Wall, and a slate of other great podcasts, including Keith Knight and his show Don't Tread on Anyone, and Patrick McFarlane, Liberty Weekly, those two previous guests of the show. And then Tommy Solomon's also hosts Year Zero, which you could find there. You can support the show by donating at Patreon or Subscribestar. Also, donate crypto. The information is in the show notes page. You can help the show out by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, palomaverdecbd.com. Promo code PEACE, and when you use that promo code, the show gets a kickback. So you'll save $25 on orders of $75 or more, and you will help the show. Through the years, the show, has gotten a lot of financial help from listeners. I've been doing something for 4+ years, so y'all have chipped in a lot and, paid for subscribing feeds for the show and microphones and cameras and lighting and all kinds of really important stuff that has, allowed me to produce probably 700+ episodes now. And so, that's all been really appreciated. And one of the great things that has happened since 2020 is this partnership with Paloma Verde, where it's a great small business run by libertarians, Carlos and Vanessa Ablar, and they produce high quality CBD products. They put the lab tested results right there on their website, and so you know what you're getting. I feel very comfortable promoting their products, not only because I've used them and I enjoy them, but also because I, along with anybody else who wants to use their products, can go and make sure that the amount of CBD that they say is in their products is in their products. And so it's been absolutely great partnership. It's helped out the show, and hopefully I've helped out and with that business as well by promoting it here and being one with along with a lot of other great people people who promote Paloma Verde. So palomaverdecbd.com, promo code PEACE. My recommendation is always the topicals. I really like the sports cream, but I know I've heard people like the soft gels, especially the ones with melatonin to help them get to sleep, or the extracts, but they even got products for your dog. So if you don't already use CBD, check out the education tab, or feel free to hit me up. I'll give you my personal recommendations on all their products. But if you if you already use CBD, you know what you want, and they got it at Paloma Verde. So help out the show and do your CBD shopping at palomaverdecbd.com. All right, let's go in and start talking about this. We have the Osha Mandate first, and this was actually reinstated. Let's see, December 17th, I believe, was the ruling from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the write-up here is by Reuters, basically explaining that this is the mandate that Biden declared, I believe, in September, saying that any business with at least 100 employees would have to have a mandatory vaccine program or a mandatory test and mask for anybody who is unvaccinated. And I believe the test would be weekly. I'm sure it would really add up in cost. Now, initially, a lower court ruled or put an injunction on OSHA enforcing Biden's mandate, saying that it would likely go to the Supreme Court and be found unconstitutional, and that I guess there would be damages done in the time time between then and when the Supreme Court ruled. And so, initially is shut down by an injunction, and then the Sixth Circuit Court, I believe on a 2-1 ruling, where it is justices appointed by Democrats that go ahead and reject the injunction. Now, I do expect this, to go to the Supreme Court, and I don't think that this ruling necessarily reflects a ruling of constitutionality or not. It merely, I think, was just an argument in lifting the injunction. So I'm not exactly sure on where this goes to court from here. My hope is that it does get to court, the Supreme Court, before, I believe, Biden has announced the new start date. It was initially supposed to be January 4th. Now it's going to be January 10th. And so it seems almost problematic that they backed it up just a week after this thing was, slowed down by an injunction, I think for almost a month. And so, you think you would have given companies a little bit more time, but again, hopefully it gets to another court by January 10th, and, then it could be argued on. Now, I guess maybe I'm sure there's not many people within my audience that is actually pro vaccine mandate, but assuming that, some people are maybe somewhat comfortable with it in some cases, I don't think this the way to do it would be through executive action, as Biden has, and that's one of the real problems here. Now, I really have enjoyed reading some of Mike Meharry's takes on this over at the 10th Amendment Center, who has really pointed out and argued that, look, OSHA doesn't have the workforce to make this happen. There are so many businesses. This is going to apply to 80 million people, and so it's going to rely on a lot of essentially voluntary compliance. Now, there is some force to it because you could get busted, you could get fined, OSHA could come to your business, but it's unlikely to happen. And so, there's going to be a real, I guess, ability to fight this thing on an administrative level, probably. And so I think, there's a lot to be decided here, but I have been talking about this case on the show in the past, and I do think it's very important that right now it seems like they're trying to push this forward, and for about 84 million Americans, that's going to mean either having a mask on 24/7, or not 24/7, anytime you're at work, I guess 8 hours a day at work, likely for most people, although I wonder if there's any exceptions. I talked to a lot of people who work doubles, like 16-hour shifts, especially right now as there's like a shortage of workers. A lot of places are struggling to hire. And so there's a lot of people working double shifts and stuff like that. Having one of these masks on for 16 hours at a time could be a lot. Also, just issues, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, with using all these COVID tests, because right now there's a shortage of those. And so if we're going to be burning through COVID tests on obviously healthy people, what kind of other consequences will that have on where these COVID tests could go, particularly talking about maybe for healthcare workers in like lower income countries or something like that, where there's a real shortage of COVID tests in a lot of places in the world still. All right. The court, this I believe was a Fifth Circuit court, actually reinstated the healthcare worker vaccine mandate that was executively announced by Joe Biden in 26 states. And so I'm not quite sure where all the rulings on this are, but there are two rulings in the past on the show that we covered, by a New Orleans federal court that blocked the mandate in 14 states, and by a St. Louis federal court that blocked the mandate in 10 states. And so in those 24 states, this mandate still will not be in place. But for the other 26 states, it will be. And I recommend, if you're concerned about this or something, go and try to find out exactly where your state is on this, because I'm guessing it's going to be changing. It seems to be 3 different kind of legal standings and cases going on. And, just make sure you have a very good understanding of what's happening in your case and what court it could potentially go to, so it could go on. Now, maybe one of the few places that I could see people actually feeling comfortable with a COVID vaccine mandate or something like that would be in certain healthcare facilities, right? Like if you want all the staff at a retirement home to have it, that doesn't seem completely irrational to me. And I could see that, there being a market, even if it ends up that it's not, data verifiably scientifically able to show that having an entire staff of a retirement home vaccinated reduces the likeliness of people in that retirement community to die from COVID. I could really see, people who have the choice of where their loved ones, where they house them as they get older, that they would look for facilities that are that they guarantee 100% vaccination rate. Now, I also know people who don't care at all about that. And even if data showed that, scientifically provable data that if you have 100% the staff of a facility vaccinated is going to make outbreak that much less likely, and your loved ones 10% safer, that they don't care, or they do care, but it's not the top priority for them. They see Alzheimer's, dementia, or whatever else ailment that the person has going on. There's a lot of ailments older people could have, and they're more concerned about having higher quality of care there, and so they don't care if the staff is vaccinated. There's a lot of reasons that people would want different kinds of scenarios and settings, and so I'm not saying that I think it's terrible if any healthcare facility has a vaccine mandate, but at the same time, I don't think that there should be a nationwide mandate, mainly because one of the great things that the market can do is it could say, okay, well, all these people are comfortable. They don't care if their doctors are vaccinated or not. You know what I mean? I hope my doctor doesn't go to work sick, right? I hope he has that level of awareness being a doctor that he's not going to work sick. And I really don't care if he's vaccinated or not. This seems like perfectly reasonable position, one that I would have. I'm not concerned if my doctor's vaccinated, right? But some people are. And so if they want to go to a vaccinated doctor and have that market, great. But I don't want a shortage of doctors, and so I would rather facilities exist where unvaccinated medical staff could work. That way, too, even people who don't want to go to, somebody who's unvaccinated, if it really comes down to it and you're really sick and you need to go to a hospital, I'm sure everybody would choose to go to a hospital with unvaccinated staff versus dying in their home of something other than COVID, right? Or even of COVID. But anyways, it's just, I think the market could solve for this, and the overall, country decision that you either can or have to have this, or, can't even provide some more problems. On the last show, I had mentioned that Amtrak was, or the last show that I covered COVID, that is, I had mentioned that Amtrak had suspended vaccine mandate, or had vaccine mandates for its employees, and was going to suspend services, particularly, I think, even on the East Coast, and cut down services. And so Amtrak has now announced that they are going to suspend the vaccine mandate to make up for this. And I think it does go to show, as I've seen a lot of people say, that if you resist these mandates, the employers will eventually be the ones that have to give in. We have California to require booster shots for healthcare workers, and it's one of the first times that I'm seeing a government mandate booster shots in the United States. This is kind of interesting because initially a lot of the debate around the COVID, mandates had to do with the fact that the FDA had only given it emergency approval and not full approval, and it was kind of after the FDA gave Pfizer full approval that the government started feeling comfortable to roll out these mandates. I believe now that it's only Pfizer, and they have only just now pushed the booster, or they're trying to seek it now through the FDA, the full approval for the mandate. And so I think there's just a huge bait and switch on this issue, which once the FDA gave Pfizer initial approval on the vaccine, even though that was only for 2 doses, it just opened the floodgates, and it became the emergency authorization no longer became an issue for any of these government bureaucracies. Now, I think that's propaganda. I think it's all a bunch of crap, but at the same time, I feel like I very predictably saw that happening as just a way to move from this emergency authorization issue. And now, people are having to take something that isn't approved by the FDA. This is an interesting article here at Business Insider, and it has to do with a subject that I've been talking a lot about on the show, and that is there's reports of, I think, like 11 to 14 to maybe 22 million at most people in the United States who have only taken one dose of the vaccination. Now, another thing that I've talked about a lot, not necessarily a ton on the show, but with, friends, family, and other, libertarians and stuff like that, is just, how much does the CDC or the federal government in general know who's vaccinated? And my guess is that they really don't know, and they're guessing a lot. And that's why, they've revised the number of people over 65 who have been partially vaccinated from 99% down to 95%. But now this article is pointing out that, there's this massive gap between the number of people who have received one dose, according to the CDC, and the number of people that are fully vaccinated. Now, you do expect some gap between the two based on that. There's a 2-week window, right, between when you get your first and your second vaccination. And so that would made sense. And at this time, at least, they are counting fully vaccinated as anybody with 2 shots of, even if you got it like in the trial, I believe you're not at this point. They're not saying that, well, it's been a full year since you got your second dose, so now if you don't have that, we're going to consider you unvaccinated or partially vaccinated. They're still considering that that group of people to be fully vaccinated. And so what this is saying is that actually they're misidentifying a lot of what happened here. They're giving people, or they're counting people's second doses or booster shots as first shots. And I suppose, this could even be because, maybe people feeling a little bit paranoid, lied, said they weren't vaccinated and like took another, as like a booster shot or something like that. But my guess is that this is just government bureaucracy failures. And, they're just generally guessing, like, counties give numbers and they're generally correct on how many people got vaccinations that day, how many were, Johnson & Johnson versus mRNA, how many were first shots, second shots, boosters, and everything. And that data makes it up to the CDC. And I'm sure, like, most of the time it gets there correctly. Like, nobody types in extra 0 or, misses a 9 for a 6 or something like that. But, I'm sure those things do happen. And over time, it's just essentially junked the data. And to say the U.S. has this level of people fully vaccinated, I think is a very general number. Now, I want to talk about something else. The media in the Biden administration is moving away from the term fully vaccinated and now using the term fully immunized. And I think there's like several levels to this piece of propaganda, but it's just something I want to bring everybody's attention to, because I think it's going to really be out there in full swing in the next couple of weeks, that's the way that you talk about somebody who's quote unquote fully vaccinated, is that they're fully immunized. Now, this doesn't seem to maybe be true, because if you have full immunity to something, then you couldn't get it. But if even the CDC admits that there's plenty of vaccine breakthrough cases of people who are fully vaccinated. And I think this is a way to distort and try to obscure the issue on people who are saying that, I had COVID, so now I have immunity, I have full immunity, and basically trying to co-opt the word immunity and make that what you get from the vaccine, when that's really not the case. Immunity is like, I'm not going to get it, and you can't get it after you had the vaccine. Now, they're going to say, and everybody, has to say, after you say you can get COVID even if you had the vaccine, but they say it's going to make you get a less severe case if you get it, right? Like, we all have to repeat that anyways. But at that, it's worth noting that they're I think using an incorrect term there, but I think that's going to be the new propaganda that we're going to see in the coming weeks. Biden will lift the travel ban on 8 African countries this coming week. I think it's going to take place on January 1st. The countries are South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Lesotho, Eswatini, Mozambique, and Malawi. And these were essentially, people were banned from them from the start of Omicron on, even though it really hasn't made sense as to why the Biden administration has only kept the ban on these countries when, there was large outbreaks, almost larger than many of these African countries, in European countries, Israel, and I'm sure other countries around the world, but those are the two I could think of that have very early on COVID, Omicron variant outbreaks, and that at the same time didn't receive travel bans from the United States. Now, the other issue here, and the bigger one, is the new variant, this Omicron variant, is the first, at least generally agreed to, major outbreak of it was in South Africa. I was just looking today at the data from South Africa, and while there's been a major spike in positive test results and reports of cases from South Africa essentially throughout the entire month of December. Now, we're almost 4 weeks, or I think we are 4 weeks into this outbreak in South Africa, excuse me. And if you look at the data and you compare the number of cases to, there's, always people dying in countries that, have tested positive of COVID. And so, prior to the outbreak, it was a few people a day, a couple dozen, maybe up to 30. Now that we're in the outbreak, it's 50, 70 people a day. But if you compare to the previous 3 outbreaks and spikes in cases in South Africa, it's multiple times lower, like 4 or 5 times lower, where in the other spikes, it was hundreds of people dying a day. They haven't hit 100 people a day in South Africa during this latest. I think they call it the 4th wave now. They're calling it waves, not spikes or whatever, of the Omicron variant that they're having in South Africa. And I think that's probably should be one of the most important things to talk about right now. They're saying we need lockdowns and masks and everybody needs to be vaccinated, booster, but nobody's looking at what's happening in South Africa and saying, okay, if this is going to bring the number of deaths down by a factor of 2, 3, 4, something like that, should we look at maybe less mitigation measures, because this appears to be, and again, this is just, me looking at data from South Africa, comparing this wave to previous waves, and, the cases to the deaths, and kind of not seeing a spike in deaths despite seeing a spike in cases. Maybe it's less important to have a major lockdown or something like that. Now, the last thing I gotta mention on this, kill me if I didn't do it. If it was Donald Trump that instituted this travel ban on 8 African countries, seemingly maybe in reaction to fear initially, and then kept it on for no reason. Once it was in place, it was very clear that this variant was in numerous other countries that the U.S. did not ban travel from. And in fact, the U.S. officials have been flying around Europe for the past month, having all kinds of meetings, and there was no concern about that. Andy Blinken even had his members of his flight crew as he's traveling around Southeast Asia, contract COVID. We don't talk about that kind of stuff. But anyways, banning arbitrarily, seemingly, especially once this variant is in other countries, people from these African countries, if this was Trump, it would be decried as racist and they would have been protesting about it. But it's under Biden. Nobody even mentions that, hey, it seems kind of odd that you're not banning the people from the white countries where there's an Omicron outbreak, but you're banning people from the black countries where that's happening. The CDC says most Americans should take the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine over Johnson & Johnson safety concerns. One of the very interesting things about this is back, in, I guess, it was March or April or something, pretty soon after people started taking the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there was a report of 6 people, and I think this is in April that all this comes out. 6 people die of blood clots related to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and now that total is 9. And through that whole time, they're saying, don't worry about it. It's just a couple people. We gave millions of doses of these vaccines and everything like that. And now they're saying that this is significant enough that they are, recommending other vaccines against it. And it just seems like there's a major leap in logic there, because it seems like less people have been dying of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, over the past 9 months compared to the first, 3 months it was out, because only, according to them, 3 people have died since then. And it's just, it's very confusing how the CDC is coming to the conclusion and making the recommendations that they're making. Before, everything's okay with Johnson & Johnson, and now they're, warning to take the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccines. Now, to me, I guess in my brain, my immediate guess is corruption, right? That this has something to do with these 2 companies maybe having more sway and influence at the CDC, and they're going to be able to cash in big if they're able to weed out the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Now, the other issue here is, too, something to note is that it is the 2 mRNA vaccines that they're pushing, and there is the Johnson & Johnson, but also the Novavax that has not yet been approved, despite showing some, I think, like a 90% effective rate against getting COVID, and then 100% effective rate against severe illness and everything like that. Hasn't been approved in the US. And there are a lot of people who you still talk to who are uncomfortable with the, way these vaccines were rushed out and the new mRNA technology. And it seems that the CDC and the FDA are kind of working against having alternatives on the market, or, promoting them or making them, feel safe to people, in favor of promoting the mRNA vaccines that tend to make people more uncomfortable. Biden's planning to buy 500 million tests to tackle the COVID surge. This seems pointless, because the Biden administration doesn't even have contracts for these tests yet. There's always test shortages. And so at best, they're just gonna zap the market of all the tests, and maybe they'll be able to provide some free ones, but it'll be from the government. And so, it'll likely be less efficient than people just going to the local Walgreens or CVS and getting their test kits there themselves, even if it does cost a little bit more money, initially out of pocket for the people who had to buy the test. Of course, the government will probably spend more money on the test than individuals would. But the other problem with this is, one of the general problems I have with how the Biden administration has handled COVID. It's all reactionary, right? And so not that, everything is predictable, but if you look at what's happened with the US and COVID, it comes in main places in waves, right? Like, you have an uptick in cases over 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then it starts to decline. And if you're just, if you're seeing a COVID surge, right, happening in the United States, and your solution is to buy 500 test kits in the coming months, you're going to be late on it. Those test kits aren't going to be for this surge. That's another thing with all these states. They deploy. We have, I think, Ohio. Biden is deploying 1,000 soldiers and nurses. Ohio is deploying 1,000 National Guardsmen, and Massachusetts is deploying 500 National Guardsmen, which, we get into reasons why the hospitals need the military personnel when, they could just have their other staff in the first place. But these people need training. Massachusetts is just now training this week. Well, they're already in the middle of the COVID outbreak. It's already going to be on the decline. The same thing with these tests, or how the Biden administration delivers vaccines to countries that have a peak number of cases. Well, bringing them vaccines then isn't helpful. You should be trying to predict, what maybe country is going to have an outbreak, assuming you believe everything, right? I know some people in my audience will roll their eyes, but but assuming that, you're the Biden administration and your goal really is to stop worldwide COVID and all of that, if you're delivering vaccines to a country that's like at a peak or on decline of the outbreak, it's really pointless, right? Because by the time they figure out and get the vaccines to the medical facilities, then it's already on the decline. A lot of people in the country are, group of people in the country now have natural immunity. And also the vaccines are only effective, or, their effectiveness, according to even the CDC and that's why they're telling people to get boosters and everything like that. The effectiveness declines over time. And so what you should be trying to do is, I think, predict what country is going to have an outbreak, maybe where that outbreak will happen, and then, focus on giving vaccines or boosters, in those places, not, just picking out which country is making headlines for having a COVID outbreak and then sending 1 million vaccines there. That's not an effective way. And that's kind of the way the Biden administration has handled this COVID throughout. And not that many of these mitigation strategies have worked, but coming up with mitigation strategies after the outbreak or after the wave is already happening isn't effective. It's not going to work, even by their own ideas of what works and doesn't. Another thing going on in Massachusetts, as they have deployed, or not deployed, they have deployed the National Guard, although I think they've just started training this past week. But they're banning elective procedures starting this week in hospitals, and this is pretty disappointing. Something that's an elective procedure, may only be elective for a certain amount of time, and if it becomes not elective, it could become very dangerous. And that's something to consider with this. If we're canceling doctor's appointments, this includes cancer screenings. It's absolutely terrible. Massachusetts is a state with a high vaccination rate. They've had a lot of COVID restrictions and everything there. And so, one of the things that's been brought up in some of these articles I've read is that the staffing shortage in these medical facilities has been going on for some time, and it's more from the vaccine mandate requirements. And so I guess you have to wonder if the healthcare system would be handling this better if it was you didn't have the vaccine mandates and you have more healthcare workers that had remained in their jobs. And then, not saying that, is going to equal out or that you're going to kill more people by having staffing shortages in hospitals, but having staffing shortages in hospitals can kill people, or in, old folks in retirement homes, right? Like if you don't have enough staff there, then things go unnoticed. Maybe you don't realize somebody didn't take their medication. Mistakes happen. People get the wrong medication. People don't get cleaned up fast enough and develop infections. People don't eat enough. These kind of things happen if you have staffing shortages in healthcare facilities. And so it's not exactly like there's no downside to putting in these vaccine mandates and then having the shortages of staff. All right, let's talk about the military real quick. The Navy is in the process right now of starting to kick out sailors who do not take the COVID vaccination. The Air Force has discharged the first 27 soldiers for refusing to get the vaccine. The Air Force pointed out that these were all people on their first enlistment and who had not applied for an exemption. And so I don't know, maybe they were looking for a way out of the military or something. But at the same time, it could be a career-ending decision that the Air Force made for a lot of these young men, and could be, pretty traumatic and upsetting for their lives. As far as I've seen, the Pentagon, at least at this point, doesn't seem to be, seeking any kind of financial money back from these soldiers, but they have talked about not giving them access to the GI Bill things that they would have gotten otherwise. The USS Milwaukee, a ship of what I've seen referred to as fully immunized, but what I think they mean is fully vaccinated sailors, has a major COVID outbreak and is going to remain in Guantanamo Bay and not sail Again, they're now offering booster shots for the people on this ship, but the people on this ship are going to be have natural immunity now, and so it's very curious as to why they're focusing on giving boosters to people on these ships and not focusing on ships that don't have an active outbreak. So far, 12,000 people within the Pentagon have applied for a religious exemption to taking the COVID-19 vaccination, and the Pentagon has granted 0 of them. I'm guessing that this is going to be their policy, that they're not going to give any exemptions to anybody who took the COVID or who's requesting a way out of taking the COVID vaccine. But it's kind of disturbing, I guess, that they're not awarding any. Although, the military is one of the few places where I guess you do kind of expect that you're going to have less of a amount of control over what they're going to inject into your body. You talk about, talk to a lot of soldiers, even before COVID, they would talk about, you're a pincushion when you get into the Army and they just jab you with a whole bunch of things and you don't know what half of them are. So let's see. Then there are infections in Japan, an outbreak linked to a U.S. base. And, this is something that I've talked about a lot on the show, and I've been kind of frustrated with, where you have the U.S. government where it's really hard to lock down Americans and will ban travel from certain countries and all that. But then U.S. officials and diplomats are parading around the world doing all kinds of unnecessary things and photo ops, and, Antony Blinken's traveling to Southeast Asia, and, Kamala Harris already did a tour there, and so did Lloyd Austin. Biden was recently in Europe and, having different summits. They had a big climate change summit and everything. So if you're worried about the spread of COVID worldwide and all that kind of stuff, it seems really stupid to be sending U.S. soldiers all over the world and not to, have things on relative lockdown. And, you're going to have spread from things like the USS Milwaukee and the spread from the U.S. Worker at Camp Hassan, which I think is in Okinawa, Japan. All right, the Pentagon stopped implementing the vaccine mandate for defense contractors. This came after a court ruling that actually stopped the contractor mandate, the federal government contractor mandate. But it's, I guess kind of interesting. What I thought was going to happen was that this mandate wasn't going to go ahead for defense contractors. They have enough lobbying power to prevent it. So that seems to be what's going on here. All right, so a few stories on vaccines and kind of vaccine programs worldwide. This one from Reuters: refugees lack COVID shots because drug makers fear lawsuits. And, I'm not sure. It is Reuters talking about COVID, and they really do toe the establishment line. But the main argument is that there's a fear apparently from like Pfizer and vaccine makers that if they start distributing the COVID vaccines in, say, a refugee camp where, let's talk about the Al-Hol refugee camp in Syria, where, this is ISIS fighters. There's not good sanitation there. Absolutely horrible conditions, not enough food. I've talked about the rampant sexual abuse and everything going on in these camps in the past, malnutrition. And so if you're vaccinating this population, there's probably going to be an increase, not necessarily in side effects from the vaccine, but just an increase in health episodes that are happening in or around the time people are taking the vaccine, because there's a normally large number of like rare health incidents that happen in, camps where you have poor water, poor sanitation, massive sexual abuse and stuff like that going on. So, maybe there's some justified concern there, but it just seems like a really hollow excuse, I think, as why more refugee camps are gaining access to these vaccines. The U.S. is donating vaccines around the world. I've had trouble really keeping track of and focusing that they haven't in the past been too public of where all these vaccines are going, but recently I've found the State Department Twitter account really likes to show off how many vaccines were given out. And so it's 1.5 million Pfizer vaccines that we just donated to Egypt through the COVAX program. And this is what they say a part of 15 million doses that were donated in the past 4 months. I believe all those 15 million doses did go to Egypt. You know, Egypt is a country that's relatively wealthy and, you know, important player, compared to a lot of the neighboring countries and stuff like that. And the U.S. gives Egypt billions of dollars a year in military aid. They have a very, again, relatively strong and powerful military. And so I have to wonder why Egypt is gaining so much priority other than just being an important puppet in the U.S. world empire. Libya received over 1 million Pfizer vaccines through the COVAX program from the United States as well. The U.S. brought 200,000 to Jamaica. I don't think this was through the COVAX program. And they say that the U.S. has donated over 600,000 doses to Jamaica overall. The U.S. announced a group of 4.9 million COVID doses going to 11 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. That's over 500,000 to Angola. But the biggest one on the list, I think the most important, was over 200 million to Kenya, which in the past I talked about on the show and covered how Kenya actually hired lobbyists to lobby the Biden administration for vaccines. And so maybe that's why that country is getting so many, not because it's in need, but because they've effectively hired former Clinton officials to be their lobbyist in D.C. and to tell everybody that they really need the vaccines. The U.S. is also sending 100,000 vaccines to the Maldives through the COVAX program, sending 1.7 million Pfizer vaccines through COVAX to Bangladesh, 3.4 million vaccines Pfizer vaccines to the Philippines through COVAX. And again, the last couple of countries I think are getting a lot of vaccines because the U.S. is trying to use COVID vaccine distribution as an anti-China propaganda tool in Southeast Asia. And Lebanon got over 600,000 doses of I'm not sure. It didn't say in this one, actually, but they got 600,000 doses through the COVAX program. So that's where they're sending money, or sending the vaccines. Now, USAID, which in the past I explained, is working with the State Department and National Security Council on the 3-person panel to distribute the COVID vaccines in just a couple months here into the fiscal year, right? Because that starts, I think, end of September, beginning of October for the United States. USAID is running short on money for this. Of course, we have a $1 trillion Pentagon budget, but we can have a little bit of money to donate vaccines around the world. It's just absurd that this is any kind of issue. Now, the other possibility is, I don't want to discount that maybe this is a propaganda effort by Sam Power, who heads up AID, to get more money by saying, they're out of money, we're distributing all these COVID vaccines for us. Maybe they could get a lot more funding for her interest in Ethiopia or one of these other countries where I think she has her eye on regime change. Last thing I want to note is that Israel is planning to give a 4th dose of the mRNA COVID vaccines. I'm not sure. I don't know if Israel ever gave a whole bunch of Johnson & Johnson shots, and so it could be for Israel. Essentially, everybody will be on their 4th shot. It's going to start with people age 60 and over first, and Israel is working on a testing program first for this. They're going to run a trial before they, I guess, just open it up to everybody over 60. But interesting that it does seem like a 4th dose of the mRNA vaccines is coming to anybody on the, vaccine path. That's what I have on COVID. Now let's talk about Yemen. A lot of important stuff happening here. The first is that Saudi Arabia used the Israeli NSO group's Pegasus spyware to target the phone of a UN investigator into war crimes in Yemen. Now, I believe this investigator was heading the commission that Saudi Arabia was actually able to kill through bribes and by pressuring other countries. But this is relatively significant that you have Saudi Arabia bold enough to target the UN investigator here, and we'll see what happens. But I'm guessing not much will come of this. As much of a scandal as this really has been, what happened with the NSO group, and the U.S. was upset enough, particularly because 11 of its diplomats, I believe diplomats are, staff for its embassy in Uganda, were targeted with this. Now, it's not clear if that came from the Ugandan government or maybe the Rwandan government, which also had access to Pegasus. But nonetheless, the U.S. did sanction the NSO group, and it's caused a lot of financial problems for the NSO group. It hasn't been insignificant. And so Saudi Arabia doing this, should be a major story that they're trying to spy on an international investigation. Certainly Assad in Syria doing something like this would draw a major rebuke. But even the Biden administration that, claim to want to treat the Saudis like the pariah state they are not taking any action against Saudi Arabia for this. And I don't expect them to. Maybe the most unfortunate thing happening here, this from the BBC, Yemen war funding crisis, UN forces UN to cut food assistance. This is through the World Food Program, and it's going to reduce food assistance to 8 million people in Yemen because it's running out of funds. And so, of course, you have this absurd UN building in, New York City, and so much unnecessary wealth surrounds that thing. And, the different diplomats and all the other UN offices and everything like that. But then they can't come up with money to feed poor, starving Yemeni people. It's just absolutely unbelievable. Also, is the United States, UAE, Saudi Arabia, UK, Germany, Italy, France, even throwing the Qataris earlier in the world, the Moroccans, Egyptians, have all been involved in, profiting and waging this war that has wrapped up, hundreds of thousands of deaths at this point. And, when we're talking about just feeding the poorest and the most starving children in Yemen, these countries can't come up with a fraction of the amount of money that they use to blow Yemen to smithereens to feed the people of Yemen. It's just absolutely disgusting. And so from January, affected families will barely get half of the daily minimum ration from the UN agency. And so they're not even getting the minimum amount of food that the UN says that people need. This is 8 million families. We're not talking about, just a couple 100,000 or anything like that. We're talking about a country of, 20 plus million people, and significant numbers of them either having, being on the brink of famine conditions, being completely reliant on UN aid agencies for food, and then not even getting half of what they need. So their kids are probably going to starve to death anyways. Now, the Biden administration promised to end support for Saudi Arabia's offensive operations in Yemen, but what do you know, that didn't happen, and Saudi Arabia is laying waste to Yemen. This from December 6th, Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Saudi coalition launches 47 airstrikes against Yemen's Marib, and they say that, about 100 Houthis were killed in Marib, and, they're just raining down airstrikes on this place every day. Hopefully a lot of the civilians are out and they're not killing a lot of civilians, but essentially all the reporting we get is just Houthi fighters die, and that seems pretty unlikely. Now, in response to the major Saudi bombing that we have in Marib, the Houthis carried out a couple of strikes in Saudi Arabia, this on December 6th into 7th, and in response, Saudi Arabia carried out a pretty large airstrike campaign on the Houthi, on the Yemeni capital Sana'a, where most of the people live. This would be like somebody bombing Washington, D.C., and so it's causing a lot of damage. It's not exactly clear how many people are dying in all of these strikes, but it's been 7 almost years of war now in Yemen, and these strikes add up and continue to damage the infrastructure of Yemen. This from December 6th, Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Yemen shuffles central bank leadership as currency crashes. The central bank is trying to shoot for a 530-1 ratio with the U.S. dollar, but the practical ratio, the dollar, the Yemeni rial trades for 1,700-1 with the U.S. dollar. And so this is just goes to show how poor Yemen is. And a lot of this is because of the Saudi, I think, has been trying to cheapen its burden in the Yemen war by taking a lot of they're printing up Yemeni rials and then dumping them into Yemen. Now, maybe this is just economic warfare and currency manipulation of the absolute worst kind to do to the absolute poorest of people. But it could also, again, just be Saudi Arabia looking for a cheap way in this war. And rather than paying off people with, reals that they have to buy in dollars, they're just printing new reals for absolutely nothing and flooding the market, and this is really hurting the Yemeni economy. All right, so there's going to be a very important debate that I think will come up after the beginning of the year, and it's going to be around Patriot missiles for Saudi Arabia. According to the Saudis, the Yemenis, since 2015, have carried out 431 missile strikes and 850-something armed drone strikes within Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has countered this. They claim that 59 civilians had died in that time. I don't know if I believe that number. And it could be also that it's in part the air defense systems, the Patriot missiles land on somebody's house and, kill people that way. But they claim 59 of their civilians have died in these attacks. Of course, massive numbers of, Yemenis have died, far more than 59 from the Saudi just unbelievable bombing of all kinds of targets in Yemen. But anyways, they're looking for Patriot missiles, and they're going to use those to intercept drones and missiles coming in from Yemen. And so these are critical to Saudi Arabia being able to wage this war, because if Saudi Arabia can't defend itself against Houthi missile attacks, then, its people and its assets could be targets for the Houthis. And the Houthis are asking for talks right now, and so this could call for, or this could push Saudi Arabia to have to engage in meaningful talks with the Houthis, not just one way maximalist demands. Oh, the Houthis won't meet it. Damn, aren't they impossible Iranian puppets? I guess we can't talk with these people anymore. If they don't have the Patriot missiles to defend their country, they may have to engage in serious negotiations with the Houthis, where the Houthis, would ease up only if they're getting enough from the Saudis to, end the war, hopefully. It would be, I guess, the hopeful outcome there. And so I expect this debate to happen at some point, that Senators Paul Sanders and Mike Lee, at the very least, will introduce a bill to try to block any sale of Patriot missiles to Saudi Arabia. And, we'll see what happens from there. But I think this is going to be an important debate that comes up after the first of the year, when Saudi Arabia runs out of Patriot missiles and seeds new ones. The U.S. claimed that the Navy seized 2 large caches of Iranian weapons that were heading towards Yemen. They say that in November of 2019 and February of 2020, they got 171 surface-to-air missiles, 8 anti-tank missiles, as well as land attack cruise missile components, anti-ship cruise missile components, thermal weapons optics, and other components. I don't know if they've actually turned this up, and I don't know if they could prove that this was actually going to the Houthis. If they intercepted an Iranian ship full of weapons, well, that's going to happen. If the U.S. wasn't the world empire, I'm sure China and Russia would be seizing U.S. Shipments of weapons going different places or something like that. But we're the world empire, and so nobody could seize or touch our weapons. But we seize these Iranian weapons. It's possible that these were going to the Houthis. It does sound like weapons that they could possibly use. The Houthis have, attempted cross-border and have, made progress in southern Saudi Arabia. And so maybe in that context, like anti-tank missiles or surface-to-air missiles to shoot down maybe helicopters or something like that could be useful. I'm not sure how either of those weapons would be at all remotely useful to preventing the Saudi bombing campaign of Yemen, though. And so I somewhat suspect maybe that they would be heading to, say, Assad in Syria, as they, these are, I guess, maybe not air power, but, anti-tank missiles could be used against like Al-Qaeda forces or something like that in the Idlib province. So it's not exactly clear where these weapons are going, but that's what the U.S. is saying. It could be used on propaganda on multiple levels. For the Saudis, it's going to be justification for why the U.S. needs to sell them weapons, even though Biden said he wasn't going to do it. For the otherwise, the Iranians, this could be, oh, look at their terrorist activity in the Middle East. We can't negotiate with them on the JCPOA because, they support the Houthis in Yemen. Aren't they terrible? And, that's usually enough to convince any Americans to boo and jeer the Iranians, and then any talks or potential diplomacy with that country. Yemeni commander, backed by Saudi Arabia, was killed by the Houthis during fighting in Marib. Not clear to me how significant this is going to be. Sometimes you kill one of the commanders and, they just have somebody in line to take the place. No big deal. Doesn't change anything. Maybe it signals that the Houthis are making advances in Marib, that they were able to, threaten where this guy, was based or headquartered, or that, he felt the need to go to the front lines and put himself in danger, maybe to rally the troops or something like that. Could just been crazy general want to go stand and, fire a pistol on the front lines. That seems to be, at least in part, what happened to like the Chadian leader Deby, the president there, died fighting on the front lines when there wasn't heavy casualties. This does happen in the world. It's not like every general is Mark Milley or Kenneth McKenzie, who will never in their life be, anywhere more dangerous than like a DC cocktail party or something like that. The Iranian top diplomat in Yemen got COVID and then left the country through the Sana'a airport that was allowed by the Saudis because, they constantly bomb that thing and, could have bombed it if they wanted to. He then died of COVID. There is some report from like the Houthis and the Iranians that they feel that the Saudis prevented the diplomat from being able to leave Yemen sooner. And had he left sooner, he would have been able to survive COVID. Not sure how much of that is true or not, but it does signal that COVID is probably somewhat of a problem right now in Yemen. U.S. isn't concerned about sending any vaccines there, not concerned about sending any food there, or nothing. For all the Biden administration cares, that death count could be as high as a million. Doesn't matter to them how many Yemenis are dying. We also have then on December 16th, Saudi Arabia bombing the Yemeni capital of Sana'a again. We have the Houthis, are the Yemeni forces backed by Saudi Arabia claiming to kill 14 Houthis in an ambush in Marib. This was on December 20th. No reports if any Saudi-backed fighters were killed in that skirmish. The Houthis said that there were major air raids, 28 strikes dropped in Marib that day by the Saudis. Saudi Arabia then bombed on December 21st, the day after the Iranian ambassador left Yemen. They bombed the Sana'a airport, and that is preventing aid from getting in through that airport, a critical way to get in aid through that country. Nothing from the Biden administration, no outrage. Let the Yemeni children starve to death. Saudi Arabia bombed Sana'a again on December, I believe, 22nd, and then again on December 25th. And in this case, Saudi Arabia also claims that the Houthis fired missiles or drones at Saudi Arabia, and three people were killed in that attack. Not exactly clear if that's true. The Saudis said that their response was large scale. The Houthis report that they killed 18 Yemeni soldiers. Those are backed by Saudi Arabia on December 25th, and that the Saudis had carried out 16 airstrikes in that area. No reports on any Houthi casualties. And I think that wraps us up and brings us up to date on Yemen. So again, it's just absolutely horrible what's happening in Yemen. And there's no attempt at all from the Biden administration, even though they have absolute power to mitigate the suffering of the Yemeni people. There's every reason in the world to do it, even if you don't care about the Yemeni people whatsoever. The fact that the Saudis were spying on UN officials with Israeli spyware should maybe present, problematic to the Biden administration. They want a pariah state that held, and we're going to hold them accountable for the Khashoggi murder. Well, guess what? Khashoggi and his fiance or wife had the spyware on their phone too. So it doesn't really seem to be holding anybody accountable because, again, they're letting the Saudis continue to use that spyware to this time target UN officials. All right, that's where I'll wrap it up. Two of the most important things going on, trying to keep up with what's happening in Yemen and with COVID. COVID, they're coming for our rights. In Yemen, they're coming for everybody in that country. They're willing to kill them all to get what they want. And what they want is capitulation from the Houthis, who, have successfully ruled Yemen for about several years now. The Saudis haven't made any progress. They show no signs of, having lost territory, and in fact are gaining it, if anything. And so unless Biden is, willing to hold MBS accountable and pull the plug on this war, the suffering of the Yemeni people is only going to continue. And, we're going to look back on this as a decade of just disgusting policy by Americans, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Yemenis suffering the consequences from it. All right. Just remember to share the show, like the show, support the show, donate to the show if you can, and buy your CBD at Paloma Verde. Thanks, everyone.